and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. On behalf of the LKY School of Public Policy, Foreign Affairs and Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, I would like to welcome you to the conference Has the Game Changed? We are delighted to have Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, Deputy Prime Minister and Coordinating Minister for Economic and Social Policies, to grace this event. Welcome, sir. And now, I would like to invite Professor Kishore Mahbubani, Dean of the LKY School of Public Policy, for his welcome remarks. Dean, please.
DPM and Mrs. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, friends, colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you on a Saturday morning to this conference. I'm going to follow my usual tradition and make 3 points. The first about the organizers, the second about the topic, and the third to introduce our keynote speaker, DPM Tharman Shanmugaratnam. So let me begin with the organizers. I'm sure not all of you know what APSIA stands for. APSIA stands for the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. To put it in simple Singapore terms, is the A-League of Schools of International Affairs. It has, I think, 36 members and over 30 affiliates. And it's quite remarkable that this group is actually meeting for the first time in Singapore, and that we spent the last 2 days discussing global trends and what's happening both substantively and also what's happening in the field of international education. And I'm so glad that so many of the APSIA deans are here today. So if you don't mind, let's give them a special round of applause for flying halfway across the world. And even better, some of them will leave their wisdom behind when they come on stage later. I also want to thank the magazine Foreign Affairs, which, as you know, is the leading journal of international affairs in the world, and Jonathan Tepperman also for flying in from New York to participate in this conference. I can strongly recommend the magazine because I've had the pleasure of publishing 5 or 6 articles inside it, including one with Larry Summers in May and June last year. And all I can tell you, if you publish an article in Foreign Affairs, it does travel around the world. And we are especially pleased because the LKY School actually has partnered the magazine Foreign Affairs in trying to get our programs better known, and we are very happy with your partnership with you. So it's a really distinguished group of organizers, and of course the third one, equally important, is the LKY School of Public Policy. Let me say a bit about the topic. And we were actually quite surprised that there was such a massive turnout for this event on a Saturday morning. And we realized that this question actually has the game change. It's one I think we are all wondering about. As we all know, change is constant. I think it was the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus who said very famously, "We can never step into the same river twice." And that's true. Every time you step in the river, step out the river has changed. But of course, it makes a big difference as to whether or not you're stepping the river when the river is a very nice, slow-moving river, drifting gently down, or if you are stepping onto the river just as it's on the edge of a waterfall about to go over. And I suspect that many of us intuitively feel that with so much change in the world, it's almost as though we're going to step into the river and we're going to go over a waterfall. And I think it's in an effort to address this kind of angst that there is in the world, we decided it's timely to have this conference. Has the game changed? So I'm going to say just a few words because you're going to get a lot of discussion on the subject. But let me just give you my own personal perspective on what's changing in the world. And for me, I think that there are actually 3 big global trends that are fundamentally changing the world order. But 2 of which are discussed a lot. One is not. And the two that are, of course, discussed a lot is number one, of course, is globalization, how it has shrunk the world and made us interdependent. Number two, of course, the rapid change in technology. And while, for example, many people blame globalization for the loss of jobs, in many cases, actually, if you do an analysis, it's technology rather than globalization that is causing the loss of jobs. But the third big factor, and this is one I find surprisingly not discussed, equally importantly, is that we are also entering, at the same time as globalization, as the change in technology, we are entering a new era of human history where we are seeing the end of Western domination of world history and the return of Asia. And that could or could not have happened. Frankly, globalization, as you know, has helped Asia, but it could have sparked the rise of other parts of the world. But it didn't. It happened in Asia. And today, just to give you a simple statistic, in PPP terms, purchasing power parity terms, the number one economy in the world is China, number two is United States, number three is India, number four is Japan. So 3 out of the 4 largest economies in PPP terms are already Asian. So that's a tremendous shift too. And it also causes enormous changes around the world. So it's a combination of 3 seismic changes that is clearly changing the world order and affecting us in many ways. But I also want to add very quickly that not all of this is bad news. There is also a lot of good news that we often forget in this world. In fact, if you look at it in terms of long-term global trends in many fundamental areas, global poverty is diminishing. In 2015, we far exceeded the UN goal of halving global poverty. And in fact, by 2030, the National Intelligence Council has predicted that global poverty will go down to virtually zero. The global middle classes are exploding from 1.8 billion in 2010 to 3.2 billion in 2020 to 4.9 billion in 2030, which means more than half the world's population will be middle class by 2030. Now that's a fantastic change, which is incredibly positive that is happening. And if you look again at societies around the world and how they're running their societies, you see amazing stories of societies that were once dismissed as basket cases that are doing very well. Bangladesh is growing steadily. You remember what Henry Kissinger said about Bangladesh many years ago. To give you another country, which was a symbol of poverty, Ethiopia, has been growing at 10% over the last 10 years. That's some positive things happening in the world too. So while we talk about all the challenges, I hope in today's conference we will also speak about the positive development also. So we want you to leave here not feeling totally depressed about the future. And that's why, this is my third point, we decided to invite someone who's a truly distinguished global personality to come and begin this conference. He's DPM Tharman. Let me just say a brief word about him. Many of you in Singapore know him very well, but for our visitors from overseas, let me say that he graduated with bachelor's degrees in economics from LSE, a master's degree in economics from University of Cambridge, and he was also a graduate, by the way, of the School of Public Policy, the Harvard Kennedy School, where he received a Lucius Littauer Fellow Award for outstanding performance. He had a distinguished career in the civil service after joining MAS in 1982. Then he entered politics in 2001 and served in several ministries, but the 3 significant ones were Minister of Education for 5 years, 2003-2008, Minister of Finance 8 years, 2007-2015, and also as Minister of Manpower from 2011 to 2012. And currently he holds many titles. He's DPM, Coordinating Minister for Economic and Social Policies, Chairman of MAS and Board Member of GIC, and also Chair of the International Advisory Council of the Singapore Economic Development Board. But in addition to his very important domestic appointments, he also chaired the International Monetary and Financial Committee, IMFC, of the IMF, and he was the IMF's first Asian chair. He was also named chair of the Group of 30 in November 2016. And in spite of all these responsibilities, he carries on speaking around the world. And for those of you who want to get a flavor of what a powerful impact he has when he speaks, go to YouTube, look at his speech at the St. Gallen Symposium, which has now been downloaded 416,000 times. So you're really privileged today to hear DPM Tharman. May I invite you, please?
Kishore, Jonathan Tepperman from Foreign Affairs, Deans of the APSIA schools, and everyone who's here. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here on a Saturday morning before a weekend of community events to reflect on things both international and domestic. Has the game changed? I would first like to say that the game has been changing for a very long time. We know about the political upsets of 2016. We know about the mood of despondency with regard to globalization and cooperative internationalism. And these seem to be new surprises, shocks. But the game has been changing for a very long time when you look at what has been taking place within societies. We know about the positives. Kishore just spoke about the remarkable uplifting of people from poverty in the most populous countries in the world, China, India, good part of the rest of the emerging world. But the game has been changing in much more disquieting ways in the more advanced world. And the only surprise is how long it has taken for those underlying domestic changes in society to be reflected in politics. How has it been changing? I'll identify a few trends which are, I think, now viewed as objective fact and are well known among social scientists. First, the fact that wages have been stagnant for a very long period of time, not just for those at the bottom end of the income ladder, but for the middle class. This is true in the United States, it's true in a good part of Europe and the United Kingdom and Japan. In 1970, about 90% of those who were 30 years old had higher incomes than their parents did at the same age 30. It was a society that was just moving up and had moved up tremendously in the post-war period. Today, it's about half. In other words, only half of 30-year-olds have incomes in real terms that exceed their parents. That alone is a remarkable fact that affects the way people think individually and their sense of hope for the future. So quite apart from looking at wage trends and wage data, if we look at what happens in terms of mobility within the family, mobility from one generation to the next, you see some very powerful facts that affect individual and popular psychology. So that's incomes. The second striking phenomenon related to what I just said has been the more general decline in social mobility, almost across the entire advanced world, the more mature societies. Even Sweden, Germany, countries which have hitherto had somewhat higher rates of social mobility have seen the same decline. And it's now a stubborn fact. There have been many social interventions, but few have succeeded. Social mobility is now low, and it's not just a fact studied by social scientists. People sort of know it. people sort of know it. They know that their chances of moving up in life are less than they used to be if they start off at the bottom. And they get a sense that society is not reshuffling in the way it used to be. We've lost some of that fluidity in society. So that's the second major factor. It's been happening for some time. It's been happening for decades. It's not new. A third fact is the loss of a sense of togetherness in society. Most especially when we think about multicultural societies, but it's not just about multiculturalism, and it's certainly not fundamentally about immigration. Even within relatively homogeneous societies, there's been this loss of a sense of togetherness. And the mood of the immediate post-war period, post-World War II period, that mood where people thought of themselves and their society in terms of we, has given way to a mood of us against them. And it plays out in different ways in each society, but that's something people also sense. It's us against them. Whether it's 1% against 99 against 1, or 90 against 10, or rural against metropolitan. There's that mood of us against them. And it's not sudden, it's not new, it's been a drift that's been happening over decades, and political scientists have identified that drift. It's now complicated by the fact that the dominant models of multiculturalism are unraveling, and also being complicated by the fact that what happens in one part of the world now gets globalized very quickly. And sectarian strife in one part of the world becomes global. That's a major new complication added on to the domestic fissures, or layered on the domestic fissures that have been evolving for some time. So that's the third factor, just that loss of a sense of togetherness. And the fourth is in politics. Again, some things are not new. They've been evolving over decades. I was recently listening to Larry Bartels, who wrote a political scientist, wrote a major book when he was at Princeton. He's now at Vanderbilt. And he's done extensive work on the data, on surveys. And it basically shows that the decline in trust in government is nothing new. In fact, the major break was really in the 1960s. The major decline in trust in government took place in the 60s, at the time of what's known, sometimes called the culture wars. It's not new. And we've seen across a whole range of mature democracies this decline in trust in government. It shows up in many ways. It shows up also in voter apathy. And a striking fact of the recent American elections is the fact that 45% of people didn't vote. Almost half didn't vote. The Brexit voter turnout was higher than normal. In other words, there was a higher turnout compared to a normal general election in the UK. But voter turnout amongst the young was low. So voter apathy itself needs to be explained. It's not as if there weren't choices to be made. It's not as if the candidates were undifferentiated or the choices were undifferentiated, but people didn't have too much faith in the importance of their vote. And that too is a phenomenon that is with us in a range of advanced democracies. The politics is not, however, just a reflection of underlying social trends, underlying economic and wage trends. Politics is also a force in its own right. What politicians say does influence how people think. And unfortunately, we now have if there is a new phenomenon, it's in the social media. The way in which the social media, as a dominant media around the world today, is polarized and becoming more so. And the way in which the algorithms filter news and information, news with inverted commas and information, in a way that reinforces people's biases. So what we're seeing is increasing polarization in politics, with the rise of both the populist right and left, a weakening of the politics of the center, but the same being mirrored in the media, and in particular the social media. So it's not too surprising that people themselves think in increasingly polarized terms. And if we need evidence as to how politics influences views, the many surveys done in the United States by Pew and Gallup on how views towards trade and trade deals have changed in just the last 1 year are quite instructive. It's not as if trade changed in 1 year. It's not as if the facts of trade or the benefits or losses coming about from trade changed in a year, but views changed quite dramatically. And it's hard to explain that without thinking about what's happening in politics. And the fact that neither of the two presidential candidates actually made a case for trade, and both, in fact, made a lot of excuses for what was actually something that's been working extremely well for the United States as a whole. So, 4 trends: wage stagnation for the middle and those in the bottom half of society, the erosion of social mobility, a loss of a sense of togetherness, and fourthly, the increasing polarization in politics and the media in the broad sense. 4 very important trends that are with us. So it should be no surprise that it leads to surprises. The real challenge, therefore, is not about globalization. The real challenge is in domestic policy responses, economic, social, political. That's the real differentiator between countries. And it's worth noting that globalization and technology haven't had the same effects in all societies. Sweden has done much better than many other advanced countries. Wages of the middle income, wages of those at the lower end of the ladder have done better consistently, including over the last 10 years. Singapore is a small example of where wages of the middle and the lower end, those at the lower end of the income ladder, have also risen consistently. But there are countries where you don't get the same trends being played out, although globalization affects them in the same way. In fact, the small countries are most affected by globalization and are highly exposed to technological change. The real differentiator has been and will be domestic policy responses. And the polarized debate that we see doesn't address the real issues that are at play. What will be the key issues that we have to focus on and that will make a difference? First, we do have to pay attention to those who get left behind, and we have to think of that not in the abstract but in the specific. Geography matters. There's a reason why Enrico Letta is here, so I'll use Italy as an example. There's a reason why Mezzogiorno in the south of Italy has been languishing for a long period of time, and Milan is thriving. There's a reason why in France, Lorraine has been left to languish for a very long period of time, but places like Lyon have turned themselves around and are now a digital hub in France and in some respects in Europe. There's a reason why Pittsburgh was able to turn itself around, but many other Rust Belt cities are left to rust. There's a reason why, even in Germany, a relatively healthy, advanced economy, one of the healthiest. Cities in Baden-Württemberg, particularly around Stuttgart, are thriving. There's close to full employment, but some parts of the Ruhr Valley are still stuck in where they were 2 or 3 decades ago. It's not an accident. It's a reflection of how trade and technology play out. It's a reflection of the move away from coal to new forms of energy. It's a reflection of new demands in society that have replaced old demands, new products and services that have replaced old products and services. And creative destruction has always meant creation in one place and destruction in another. Geography matters. It's typically not creative destruction in the same place. It's very often creation in one city or town that suddenly thrives and others that decline. And that has to be recognized and addressed, not as an idiosyncrasy, but as a natural fact. It's what economic theory predicts. Economic theory has always predicted that trade will have benefits and losses. The benefits exceed the losses, but if you don't do anything about the losses, they're going to affect the body politic in a disproportionate way. That's not economic theory, but that's what we learn from experience. And they can be addressed, because there's a reason why Lyon, Pittsburgh, Stuttgart, and many other cities have regenerated themselves. City leadership, federal support for city leadership, close collaboration between universities, training institutions, community colleges, and employers, and a system that gives people hope early in life through schools. These things count. And it's not just hope. You see examples of it. You see examples of how it's done much better in some places than others. So regeneration of cities that are in decline or have been left behind has to be a very important priority. Regeneration of people's careers is a very important priority too. And I say regeneration because there's a lot of focus on redistribution, and I won't say that's unimportant. You need redistribution in society, and you need more of it going forward than in the past. But it's not at the heart of the matter. It doesn't give hope. Redistribution doesn't give hope. Regeneration is what brings hope, because you allow individuals, communities, and cities to rise through their own abilities. And we have to focus more than ever before on helping people regenerate their careers, because everyone's career is going to get disrupted sometimes, a few times. It's in the nature of technological change, and as Kishore said, technology has been far more of a disruptor than globalization from every objective study. We have to reorient our systems of public education and the way in which we deploy public resources so as to help people to refresh their skills, sometimes even shift career, but basically regenerate themselves at various points in their life. What happens in the first 18 or 22 years of your life is a useful foundation, particularly if it's broad-based, but it's not enough, and it can provide a false sense of confidence about how well we do in life. So we need a whole system of reinvesting in people throughout their lives. So that's the second factor. Third, neighborhoods matter. And I say this in a sense quite different from cities and economic regions. Housing neighborhoods matter. There's been a set of very rich research being done in the US and elsewhere that shows how important neighborhoods are, the composition of neighborhoods are, in determining social mobility and a sense in which people thrive together or do badly together. How segregated a neighborhood is does make a difference to everyone. Family structures and the concentration of unstable families does matter. And the link between school and family matters. So neighborhoods and neighborhood policy has to be a central feature in public policy. And when we think of urban planning, it can't be fundamentally about the functional aspects or the utilities and the making sure that things are livable in the concrete sense. Urban planning has to be fundamentally social urban planning. It's about whether urban planning enables and encourages the mixing of people, discourages segregation, and enables a mood of optimism to pervade in a community. So that's a third very important area that needs more attention. And again, we see how it's done better in some places than others. And fourth, the politics itself. There's nothing inevitable about the drift towards populism across a whole range of countries. We have to regenerate the politics of the center. And it can be done. There's been a long drift towards short-termism in politics, left and right, in the US Democrat and Republican. It's reflected in the brazen neglect of some very obvious issues, the pensions crisis, healthcare funding issues. Completely brazen because the facts are very clear, but neither left or right in conventional politics has found that it pays to be truthful about the issues and to offer solutions that give people confidence that the next generation is not going to be worse off than today's baby boom generation. And that's just bad. That's just bad. But we have to find a way in which honesty comes back into politics and a sense of long-termism. Because every of the major challenges that we talk about, or the ones I just mentioned, social mobility, regenerating towns and cities, every one of them requires actions that only pay off over multiple electoral periods. And short-termism is the biggest enemy of social mobility and the regeneration of cities. So we have to get that politics that is honest, that tells people what's what, but offers them hope because there are real solutions that are available. There are real solutions, and those are the solutions that the politics of the center can bring back confidence in. So I think I'll end my comments there, and I look forward to an open discussion. Thank you very much.